Chapter 22 of The Beautiful Mrs. Davenant by Violet Tweedale. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 22. Agnes Howard's Reward. It was 9 o'clock before Warburton found time to go again to Little Glentworth. His day had been crowded with such startling and terrible revelations that he felt absolutely worn out in mind and body. Still, a hidden urge within prompted him to learn at once any further details, to obtain certain missing links in the Lake House tragedy before he slept. Added to this, he was fully alive to the fact that the ladies at Little Glentworth would be deeply anxious for any further news he could supply. Harry had arrived in Mrs. Davenant's car, greatly perplexed, but made aware by the chauffeur that Geoffrey Thorpe was dead, and after a few minutes passed alone with Letty, the three sat down to a simple meal. Mrs. Geoffrey Thorpe did not appear, and Letty stated that she seemed to be very busy packing up, and had not opened her lips whilst they were alone together in the kitchen. Then followed an hour or two of painful disclosures, in which Letty recounted all she knew, and Warburton supplemented her information from Mrs. Davenant's statement of the morning. The close connection between Hilda Davenant and the murdered man was amazing enough in itself, but his imprisonment for years in a wing of the Lake House, without any living soul outside having even suspected that he still lived, seemed to Harry so preposterously improbable that he wondered at moments if he was passing through some hideous nightmare. Sometimes he asked himself if Mrs. Davenant was sane or insane in claiming Mark Thorpe as her husband. Was she under some wild hallucination when stating her experiences of the previous evening? But there was Letty's account of the man dropping from the tree, of the alarm she had given, and of Geoffrey Thorpe's terror which drove him forth in pursuit of the fugitive. There was that return alone in dripping garments, and the confession that followed before he breathed his last. Geoffrey Thorpe had possessed no knowledge of Hilda's relationship to his captive. Even the astute Mrs. Greatrex had failed to suspect the connection. It was very unlikely, judging from Hilda's statement, that Mark Thorpe had escaped drowning. Later her words would be fully corroborated. Their long and careful sifting of available facts came to an end at last, and it was decided that Geoffrey Thorpe should be buried with his forefathers in Little Glentworth Church. His crime, they all agreed, must be dealt with later, when the full volume of facts relating to it had been compiled. Harry decided to remain at the Lake House, in the room that Letty had laboured hard to prepare for him, and where so much work awaited him, not the least painful duty falling to his share being an interview with Mrs. Geoffrey Thorpe before she took her final departure. Warburton fully agreed with Letty and Harry that if the crime could, without injury to others, be buried in the old man's grave, it would be best for all parties concerned, but there could be no final decision until the widow of the murdered man had been consulted. It was 6 o'clock before Letty and Warburton were free to drive off to the vicarage, with the promise to return on the following afternoon and bring with them Mrs. Davenant. The confession of Geoffrey Thorpe, now in Harry's safe possession, would then be read aloud. Letty had been put to bed at once by the compassionate Emily, and was vastly comforted by Harry's nearness and the kindness of her friends. Then the brother and sister had a long confidential talk whilst they sat at supper, and before Ambrose set out once again for Little Glentworth. On arrival he saw that he was expected, and he was at once shown to the drawing-room. Agnes Howard was standing up alone by the fire, awaiting him. The ruddy light falling upon her showed her very pale, and dark rings round her eyes spoke of great anxieties. Assuredly some heavy trouble lay at her heart. She did not speak or move till the door was closed behind him, and he had advanced towards her. Then she held out her hand. "This is good of you. You must be so weary, but I've always trusted you from the moment we first met, as I've trusted no one else in my life. Hilda has had to go to bed with a splitting headache, and has deputed me to be perfectly open and frank with you as regards her past. I will be equally frank regarding my own." She motioned him to a chair, and they faced one another, but he turned aside his head and shaded his eyes with his hand, that she might not see the pallor that had overspread his face. He cared for her so deeply that he shrank with dread from this coming interview. Her past! What was she about to tell him? Then he sensed in her silence a tiny thread of doubt creeping through her mind, and he rallied all his forces, thrust aside his love for her, and grasped the stern realities of the hour. The look in his eyes, as they now met hers, reassured her. What I am going to tell you is the latter history of two women's lives, lived in defiance of orthodox morality. Above all, I must impress upon you the absolute fact that I have stood willingly by Hilda through all her troubles, and will do so to the end. I have in fact condoned, nay, even encouraged in her certain actions that to you will doubtless seem very terrible. She paused, and he shot her a glance of encouragement as he leaned forward, deeply attentive to her words. He had command of himself now, and she could no longer dismay him. "I am accustomed to tragic disclosures," he reminded her gently. "That they come chiefly from those in a humble walk of life does not make them less interesting to me. I try to understand human nature and its infinite complexities, and to remember my own painful deficiencies. Is it really your considered wish to confide in me?" Her eyes dilated as she watched him closely. She was about to reveal herself in a light which she believed would be hateful to him. She experienced some prescience of the poignant regret that would always haunt her life unless it remained in touch with his, yet she did not flinch. As yet she did not bear him love, but there was in her, stronger than she knew, a reverence, an admiration, a respect for him that drew her to him with an indefinable attraction, and which might sooner or later deepen into love. Already it was sufficient to make her realize that profound regret would darken her future should he become estranged from her. "It is absolutely necessary that I confide in you, in order to throw full light on the crime just committed. We have looked on you as our sincere friend. As you know, we have no male relatives to turn to in an emergency. There will be many details upon which we must seek advice. Before I go further, Mr. Warburton, do you accept the trust?" He threw back his head, his whole expression that of vigorous strength. "I most willingly accept any trust you may honour me with, Agnes, and with all my heart and soul, and the help of God, I will advise and aid you to the best of my ability." Unconsciously, the name by which he thought of her passed his lips. That and the glow of strength in his voice and eyes heartened her exceedingly to go forward to her task. There was no mistaking his sincerity. "I thank you," she said quietly. "Now I will begin with the early life of Hilda Davenant. That was her maiden name. She was born of poor parents in New York, and she always possessed great beauty. At an early age she went on the stage and made considerable progress in her profession. She remained absolutely virtuous, according to the orthodox conception of the word, until after she became the wife of Mark Thorpe, 14 years ago. They were married in Washington, where she was playing. At that period I lived also in Washington with my only brother, Cecil Howard. We were British-born, but owing to my brother having made a large fortune in America, he eventually settled there, and when our parents died, I joined him and kept house for him. He was a delicate man, and required the care of one who really loved him. His was a wonderful nature, great, generous, large-hearted, and wide-minded, and I adored him. I found his house in Washington was the rendezvous of the intellectuals of the city, and a very delightful society was gathered around him. Mark Thorpe happened, by a mere chance, to be brought to our house one night by one of Cecil's old friends. He was the rage at Washington at the time, and extraordinarily attractive to women. As a new and charming acquisition, one met him everywhere, and he returned all hospitality with a splendid lavishness, which we believed to be justified by his means. A more plausible adventurer, a more consummate impostor, does not exist in history. It was true that he came of ancient stock, and was owner of a fine old property, but he had squandered the greater part of his means, and was already living on his wits, though none suspected this at the time of which I speak. We learned after that he was obliged to leave England because of several actions which brought him into conflict with the law. I believe he could easily have married one or other of our great American heiresses, but he professed to care for me, and we became engaged." She paused in her narrative, as Warburton uttered an involuntary exclamation of astonishment. So extraordinary a statement did not seem plausible in view of what he already knew. A sad little smile flitted over her face as she proceeded. "It may seem hard to believe, yet for a time I was very happy. I really cared for Mark Thorpe, and immensely admired his bright intelligence and quick responsiveness. He found it easy to make any woman love him. Then came the first shock. I received an anonymous letter warning me that he was paying devoted attention to the beautiful young actress Hilda Lambert, the name under which she played. I said nothing of this to Mark, but I had him watched. The warning was confirmed. A day or two afterwards I received a letter from him telling me that he had been secretly married to Hilda Davenant. When I told my brother of all this, I was shocked at the effect it had upon him, and all my own troubles instantly became merged in his. It turned out that he was madly in love with Hilda, and had believed that his love was returned. He had hoped to make her his wife." A quiver of deep emotion crossed her face. She stopped speaking for a moment, and her whole attitude was exhausted and drooping. Warburton was listening intently, absorbed in the story she told. "A great and terrible ordeal, but you rose triumphant over it," he said gravely. "Yes, over my own wounds, but oh, how I suffered," she continued calmly. "Time passed on, and rumour became busy with the affairs of Mr. and Mrs. Thorpe. It was said that he treated her abominably, and that he was penniless. With broken health, she was forced to work hard for a living. Divorce was suggested, but he contrived to evade it. After 18 months came the climax. Mark Thorpe forged my brother's name for a large amount. He was tried and sentenced to 10 years' imprisonment, and Hilda Lambert was left ruined and very ill. It was then that Cecil asked me to go to her and see what could be done to aid her. You see, he loved her still, and could not be happy while she was miserable. I consented at once. Though she had taken my lover from me, I bore her no enmity, and were we not fellow sufferers, hers being far the deeper wound? I found her alone and quite broken. Her husband's behaviour had estranged all their friends, and she had just given birth to a dead child. She was still lovely, but worn to a shadow. Our meeting was a strange one, and she began by demonstrating how she had been punished for her actions. The great fault in her character was thoughtless impulsiveness and liability to be carried away on the wings of skilful argument. She had never ceased to regret her marriage, which she had rushed into in a fit of pique against some fancied slight put upon her by my brother. Now she realized all she had lost in playing him false. We talked long and openly, and she told me how utterly weak she had been in Thorpe's hands. She was carried away by his singular charm and magnetic personality, but he tired of her at once, and she became hopeless and wretched. When she spoke of divorce, he terrorized her. Gradually they sank into very low water, and when at last the law laid hold of him, they were at their wits' end. On returning home, I told Cecil all the details of our interview. He was deeply moved, and that night he asked if I would consent to her coming with us to our villa in the Adirondacks, where we proposed going the following week. He argued that we were now her only friends. and if deserted by us, there could be but one end for her in her changed circumstances. He believed, from all he knew of Hilda, that there was a vast amount of good in her nature. In the days of her success she had been noted for her warm-hearted generosity in helping poor and struggling artists. Finally, Cecil laid before me what amounted to a challenge. Dare we leave this soul to drift downwards when it was so easy for us to lift her up? Again I acquiesced at once. The unfortunate girl attracted me. I was intensely sorry for her, and I saw that upon this scheme my brother's happiness depended, though its dangers were at once apparent to me. I shall never forget that long hot summer and the perfect happiness of those two. It was plain to see that they worshipped one another, that they were in perfect accord and made to be man and wife. Then came the time when Cecil opened his heart to me again, and told me that their love had been consummated. He had done his best to persuade her to seek a divorce in order that they might be married, but she resolutely refused. She maintained that her past was too tarnished to be linked openly with his, but she gave herself willingly to him in secret. I was not surprised by those revelations. What else had I anticipated? Subconsciously I had known how it must end, and his perfect happiness obliterated any scruples I might have had against continuing to reside under his roof. With my full consent and approval, Hilda agreed to remain with us, nominally as our guest, and I continued to be absolute mistress of my brother's house. I willingly condoned what is called sin, and countenanced what was, in all but the legal sense, a most united marriage. When we returned to Washington, Hilda was installed in a small house near our large one, and their mutual adoration seemed to give my brother new life. Her nature was so sweet and sunny, so unselfish and devoted, that I grew to love her dearly, and look upon her as a beloved friend. Beneath that rather worldly manner which she has latterly assumed as a defence, lies the warmest heart that ever breathed. She required someone to love and to help. Now that she herself is freed from worldly anxieties, Letty has filled the gap. After 2 years of great happiness, my brother died in her arms, of pneumonia. He divided his fortune between Hilda and me, and we elected to settle together in England. Then, 9 years ago, came news from our Washington lawyer that Mark Thorpe had escaped from his prison, and had secreted himself on an English-bound ship, which had foundered at sea with all hands. At length Hilda rejoiced in freedom, but it was short-lived, for, as she told you this morning, a letter arrived which she had no reason to disbelieve was from her husband. It stated that he was still alive, having been picked up by a vessel bound for the Mauritius. Whilst being hauled on board, his arm was crushed and had to be amputated. Finally, as you know, he arrived in England. Those were years of wretched uncertainty for us both. Though we had no knowledge of where Mark Thorpe lived, he had discovered our whereabouts, and any hour he might have presented himself before us. Instinctively I knew that even after suffering as she had, Hilda would never have had the heart to return him to prison, and I fully anticipated long years of blackmail. Up to now it has remained an absolute mystery to me why he never wrote again or asked for assistance. She paused a moment and then added softly, "All this must seem very terrible to you, and doubtless you think I have acted very wrongly." Her lips quivered and her voice trembled, but her eyes met his resolutely, fearlessly. "No," he answered her very gently. "I only think that your actions have been marvellously human in the highest sense of the word. You lost yourself in your love for others. Tell me, how came you to settle here? You must have known of its proximity to the lake house?" "Oh, certainly we did. In searching for a country home we heard of Little Glentworth, and Hilda determined to go and see it. Because of its nearness to the place she had an actual claim upon, she decided to live here. She argued that it was always better to face the worst and be prepared for it. And if Mark Thorpe was to turn up again, she would know it at once, for surely it would be to the lake house he would come. I believed, on the contrary, that this would be the last place in which he would show himself, so I readily fell in with her plans. We knew that Geoffrey Thorpe was in possession, and we had no desire to depose him. We concluded that either he didn't know of Mark's escape, or he simply went on holding the lake house till its rightful owner claimed it. It was not to our interest to make any public or private inquiries. Latterly, Hilda developed an extraordinary attraction for the place, and would visit the lake in secret on frequent occasions. She told me she felt strongly that the culmination of her life's tragedy would be worked out there. She had nothing to go on. She simply felt convinced that something was going to happen there which would bring matters to a head and clear up her life. She was quietly sitting there by the lake when the sound of running feet startled her. In another moment or two her husband stood before her, terribly altered, but recognizable. Before he could speak, he was off again, tearing away for life and freedom, and hotly pursued by his gaoler. Crouched in the shadows of the summer-house, she heard the conflict, without understanding its import. She was so terrified that Mark Thorpe would return and kill her that she failed to see the old man pass. She thought his footsteps were those of Mark returning. She first saw Geoffrey Thorpe after he had committed his crime, and when he stood before her, streaming with water, he answered her question by confession. He also made a confession during the night to Letty. There is also a written confession now in Harry's possession. He wishes Mrs. Davenant to come with me and Letty tomorrow to the lake house to hear it read. Will she come? Asked Warburton. Oh, I'm certain that she will. She has the right to know what her husband's fate has been during the last few years, and there is still the horrible fact to be faced, that his body lies at the bottom of the lake. We hope and pray that the tragedy will not have to be made public, but right and justice must be done. Tell me about poor Letty. How is she? Wonderfully calm, and now I hope sound asleep. Harry wishes me to marry them immediately. Meanwhile she will remain with us and be married from the vicarage. He rose. It grows late, he said. There is nothing more need be said tonight. We will meet again tomorrow. Will you express to Mrs. Davenant my warmest sympathy, and assure her I am absolutely hers to command. Now—" He broke off suddenly, and as she rose and came to his side, her face paled instinctively at a sudden strangeness in his voice. She was still in doubt as to how her story had affected him. I will give Hilda your message, but what message do you leave with me? In her clear, honest eyes there was neither timidity or emotion, and he took both her hands in his. There was something in the grave dignity of his face she had never seen before, a new expression. There was love-making in every tone of his voice. Why are you afraid, Agnes, that I should judge you harshly? Is it not enough that no action in your past has come from coldness of heart, from any scheme of selfishness, from any base motive? Do you remember what A Kempis says of love? Nothing is sweeter than love, nothing stronger, nothing higher, nothing more generous, nothing fuller and better in heaven or earth. The past is past, and we should no more hinder the development of the future than the forest lets the shed leaves hinder the spring grass from growing. Neither knew how it came about, but for several minutes they clasped each other in silence. The solemnity of a great peace was upon them. She could hear the beating of his heart, and she thought how strange it was that each one of those deep pulsations meant love for her. Mysterious, inexplicable, and sudden as it was, she knew that in that still embrace she had found rest for her soul. This was that one deep draught of life which she had waited for through all the years of her early womanhood. To feel that she desired nothing so utterly as she desired this man's love, and to give him her soul and body in return, was that measure pressed down and running over which fate had at last given into her bosom. End of chapter 22.